I love the way that Sammy, the character played by Tom Noonan, is introduced. You see him from the very beginning when Caden walks out to get the newspaper in the opening scene. And then you see him pop up in the margins on a sidewalk, his shadow appearing as Caden has sex with his wife. And then he finally appears and says that he's been following him for 20 years and that he knows Caden better than he knows himself. He's almost like this external conscience. Like he shows up and Caden's been having this unspoken furtive passion for Hazel. Hazel's been having it in return. Neither one of them can say anything about it, and neither one of them are really actively doing anything about it. And Sammy just shows up and calls it out for both of them.
Hazel, I don't think we need to talk to anyone else. This guy has me down. I'm going to cast him right now. And then maybe you and I can get a drink, and we can try to figure out this thing between us. Why I cried. Because I've never felt about anybody the way I feel about you. And I want to fuck you until we merge and do a chimera.
He's really Caden's external conscience, but in a way where he's not necessarily a good person telling him right for wrong. He's just sort of a head check, saying that sometimes a person from the outside understands you better than you understand him yourself, which is a line he actually literally says in the film. At this point, it almost seems inevitable that Sammy and Hazel will end up romancing themselves, since Caden is just unable to do anything for himself. And it's sort of tragic on both ends. You're thinking that Sammy is doing it because he's been so fascinated with Caden. This is his only way of really getting so close to him that he's really inside his shoes, or inside the shoes Caden almost wishes he could have. And Hazel, in turn, says that she's romancing Sammy because it's the closest she can get to Caden, which Caden just gets upset and says, I'm right here. I'm the real thing. But she just feels like she has to do it to even make him jealous.
You know, Tammy's right. I don't understand why you're with Sammy.
He's nice. He's available. Fucks me without crying.
Since when are you available?
And what's kind of tragic about this is that there's both Sammy and Caden end up doing the same thing. A third of the way into the film, when Caden realizes that Hazel has moved on and had a life without him and married, he goes to the top of a hotel and nearly jumps off and tries to commit suicide, but he's stopped by a stranger who just runs up out of the blue, never really introduces himself, and grabs Caden and saves his life. When Sammy does the same thing, realizing that he can't have Hazel either because she's in love with Caden, he's surrounded by extras, and you almost want to ask, do any of the extras not have the free will to save him? Because we're living in sort of Caden's mind and his directorial vision. Why can't anybody step forward to help Sammy? And it gets almost scary because at the end, when Sammy jumps and dies, Caden's first reaction isn't tragedy. Even though Sammy's asking him to look at himself and to look at his actions, he tells him to get up. Like, even in this moment, he's still the director and he should have control over somebody's actions. But Sammy's proven that he can't. And the question here is just, does Caden even recognize that?
I didn't jump, Sammy! A man stopped me before I jumped! Get up! I didn't jump.
The first time that we see Caden wear a wig, we're almost not even sure why he's doing it. My first thought was that he's doing it because he's just continuing to try to play himself when he had hair. He's so old now that he's bald. They did a lot of hair work in this. This was the number one thing they actually did to try to age Philip Seymour Hoffman. You think he's just being old Caden trying to feel like young Caden, like he's almost putting on him a costume of himself. But then when Diane Wiest starts taking a more active role and playing Caden, you start to wonder, again, about this question of the blurring of identities. The first time you see Caden take on a second identity is when he shows up at the apartment complex where his ex-wife, Adele, is living. And as a very tiny side note, the name on his wife's apartment door is Capgrass. Capgrass is another inside joke by Charlie Kaufman. It's another disease. It's the delusion that all of your friends are imposters and that they may look like your friends, but they're actually just tricks. And you can't trust anything that you see. So he goes to this apartment, and from here on out, he starts taking on a second identity as Ellen. An old woman in the hall mistakes him for the maid that Adele has hired to clean his apartment, and he just says yes. So he gets a key to her life, and he starts living his nights as Ellen, as a maid, cleaning his wife's apartment just to be closer to his old life, which, of course, drives his current wife, Michelle Williams, absolutely insane. And then he cast a character to play Ellen because she's becoming such an important part of his life, and that is Diane Wiest's character. When Diane Wiest takes on his own role, he ends up playing Ellen himself. So he's playing a second version of Ellen on top of it. And it's at this point, the blurring specifically of him and Diane Wiest becomes one of the main last act themes in the film, because he starts taking on Diane Wiest's memories, her memories of her childhood with her mother and all the dreams that Diane Wiest's character wanted to have for herself. And then she starts directing him and telling him of her own memories. And instead of her living in his mind, now he started living in her mind.
You're supposed to have something. No, calm, love. Children. A child, at least. Children. Meaning.
And you would think that this would be a problem for him, but it's actually okay. And the film actually starts to embrace this, because she starts telling him through the earpiece that he's wearing that we're all the same. She says the lines that I think are really beautiful.
This is everyone's experience. Every single one. The specifics hardly matter. Everyone is everyone.
In this moment, it's almost like kind of a further embracing of that famous line from Chekhov, where he said that happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. I feel like Charlie Kaufman here is saying that even all unhappy people are unhappy in the same way. We all have these same needs and wants and lonelinesses and pains and memories and disappointments and resentments. And we think that that they make this individual, but they actually just sort of unite us in this blanket of misery. And it's a depressing idea, but it's also sort of beautiful.
And the truth is, I feel so fucking sad.
We see from the first time that Caden reads a newspaper that he sees the facts of the world through his own lens. He looks at a picture of Harold Pinter, and he immediately thinks that Harold Pinter is dead, when it's that Harold Pinter has just won the Nobel Prize. And this myopia that he has, where he's only fixated on what he wants to see in the world, which is only the negative parts, which is only the parts about illness and disease, that he's just missing the rest of the world happening around us. And you see this creep up so slowly. It's almost like a joke from Charlie Kaufman when you first see it. He's in the middle of one of his grand set pieces, and there's tanks on the street, and there are people wearing gas masks, and none of this is ever explained. And Caden Cotard seems completely uninterested in even figuring out what this is. He's so interested in dissecting his own emotional reality that the actual facts that the world around him is collapsing is completely beyond the point. He doesn't even seem to recognize it at the very end, when he's walking through the streets of his creation and everything is dead. Almost everybody is dead. There's bullets whizzing around him. And here we are in the middle of a real disaster, the actual World War apocalypse. And it's something he's never even worried about. And yet it happened to him just the same. I feel like for us, it's just this moment of really seeing that here you are being so darkly invested in your own navel-gazing that the real problems that are actually going to happen, that are actually going to affect your life and actually going to kill people you love, happen without you even worrying about them, and almost without him even noticing. When Hope Davis first appears as his therapist, Madeline, at first she just seems sort of like a joke about psychiatry in general. She only sort of speaks in platitudes. How does this make you feel? And whenever Caden tries to actually talk about his feelings, there's something masterful and hilarious in the way that Hope Davis always manages to begin her next sentence before Philip Seymour Hoffman finishes his. She's just completely cutting him off.
I want to do something important while I'm still here.
That would be the time to do it, yes. I have a book that might help you get better.
Better?
But then when he appears back in her office alone after he receives the MacArthur Genius Grant, her character actually takes this other turn, in which she immediately is attracted to his power. She cozies up next to him on the couch. She's interested in seeing what she can get from him now that he's a man who has access to unlimited money. But her character is actually not even just that. It's not even just that she's a potential gold digger. It's that she reaches up behind her and you see that she's also a creator. She's written dozens of books, scores of them. And she's sort of this like contrast example of creativity and ego. While he's only been talking about creating things that maybe other people will someday read, she's done dozens of them. And what's ironic about that is you know she's not even as smart as he is, that she doesn't even seem to be that good of a therapist, but she's figured out a way to actually be a creator, take the thoughts in her head, actually turn them into reality, and then promote them, and then get people to buy them, even if she sort of forces him to buy them, which she does. And then she even uses him to market her own things, putting him in her advertisements on the computer. I like that Kaufman is here setting up the idea of two different ways of creating art. But he equalizes it at the very end, because when Caden is walking through the streets that are just his artistic vision destroyed, I don't think it's a coincidence at all that you see not just one, but two of her books on the street also thrown away. It's like, no matter how you create the work, there's still this risk that it's just going to wind up as trash. The one caveat that I almost feel like I have to say, though, is that Charlie Kaufman didn't really want this film explained. The number one thing he refused to do in interviews is tell people what it meant. And that's because he wanted people to figure out what it meant for themselves. So I almost feel a little guilty telling you what I think it means, but maybe that's just it. It's what I think it means. If this is a film about creativity and about reacting to the things you see in your world and how everybody interprets things in their own way and tries to capture them down, maybe that's the best way that this film can be remembered. Although I do deep down really hope that all the people who think it's just a crazy mess that's completely unconstrained, I really hope they at least try to give it another look, because it's not that at all. Thanks for listening. I'm Amy Nicholson, and you can find me at the LA Weekly and on Twitter at the Amy Nicholson.
This is Dave Chen. You can find me at slashfilm.com and at davechen.net.